Today, we are talking about how to set up a podcast. This is something, hey, if you want to set up a podcast, this is something you need to watch. So, this is the show for you. We're going to walk through all the steps and some things you may not realize to make sure you set up your podcast for success. So, let's get started.
Welcome to Marketing and a Mic. Sarah and I are here again, and we are here every single week. Well, we try to be here every single week.
Yes.
And we talk about all kinds of digital marketing trends. So what do we have going today, Sarah?
All right. So today we're talking about starting a podcast. And let me tell you, it's not difficult, but it requires preparation. So before you grab the mic and hit record, there's a lot of things that you need to do ahead of time in order to launch a successful podcast. So we're going to get right to it.
Yes, and as much as people hate to do it, there is a little planning to be done. So that's number one. You have to start out with a planning process. And this is what's really overlooked. Sometimes it's like you said, you can't just grab a mic and get started. You really have to think about it. So your podcast should be focused on one overall theme or niche.
Mm-hmm.
And we always talk about your target audience. Think about who buys your stuff or who would be interested in your information. So this goes hand in hand, and it's often missed. And so you're out there doing a podcast for no reason.
Yeah, and this is why this is really the first step of it. So you really have to make sure you determine your target audience. I mean, you know what it's about, okay? But immediately after that, you need to think about who it's for. So your target audience is going to be, it's really going to dictate the concept and the content of your show. So the theme, the title, the topics, and everything in between. So do not skip over this part. Make sure you know who this podcast is for.
Exactly. And when we talk about thinking about a niche, it's really more important, like you said, that you know exactly who your niche audience is.
Mm-hmm.
Who is this for? For example, will your show be about small business or more for startups and entrepreneurs? Because that'd be two different content lines that you could go down. So unless you know exactly who you're making your podcast for and why you're doing it, it's going to be kind of difficult to grow an audience.
It sure is. So along with that, we want to make sure you know your content and know your content up front. So you have to give them a reason to listen, right? In other words, like each show needs to provide value and a value to the listeners that it's actually something that they're going to gain something from, some sort of a takeaway. Like what problem is your audience faced with and what solutions are you going to offer? That's what keeps them engaged.
That's exactly right. You were telling me that you were listening to a podcast about podcasting recently, and one of the top fails that they talked about was not giving listeners any good takeaways or tips or resources. Listeners don't want to just hear about success, but rather talk about specific features or challenges or providing actual proof how people overcame adversities. You want to give them a little nugget to take away, or several.
Right, exactly. And even if you're doing like a story brand, you know, if you're telling stories, you still need to have those takeaways from each of them. So once you know your your content, you want to make sure you write out your show topics in advance. So I'm telling you, the best thing you can do when we talk about this planning part is prepare your content up front. You don't want to wing it when it comes to podcasts, that's for sure. So I mean, truly, so try to narrow it down to something that you can expand for many. When I say many, I'm talking about like at least 50 episodes.
Yeah, and when we tell people that, they have this glassed over look.
Yeah, they're like, what?
How could I possibly come up with that much? You can if you just think about it. I mean, you don't want to make your podcast so broad that your audience isn't clear about what it's about. So our advice, this is what we always tell everybody to do. You have more information in your brain than you think you do. Just sit there and start writing down stuff. Do what we call a brain dump on any topic you know about that is going to apply to what you're doing your podcast for. And you could even write down show titles. And honestly, when you and I do a brain dump, it leads to the show titles automatically almost.
It really does.
At least I feel like it does. So I think it's very important too that you make sure you're knowledgeable on the topic.
Make sure you know what you're talking about too.
So just aim for 20 topics at a time. You'd be surprised what you can come up with.
That's for sure. So now you know you've got who your target audience is, you've got your topics, you've got your talking points, you've got all that stuff listed. The next thing to us would be to name your podcast, because now you've got a lot of it pieced together so you can come up with a good name. So your podcast name, this is important. It plays a very significant role in your visibility. So with a good and descriptive podcast name, you're really going to increase the chances in getting discovered by listeners. So one approach is to use some of your main keywords in your title, like we're marketing. So we've got marketing and a mic. So it's really make sure that it's related to the topic so that when listeners are searching and your podcast name pops up, they're going to get a good idea of what this is going to be about. And you're kind of creating a searchable topic. You know, it needs to be kind of eye-catching and strategic, but it needs to also be broad enough so that you can have a lot of talking points and it still falls in that umbrella.
Yeah, it can be a little tricky thing. So, I mean, like, you don't want to go out and name it like Mike's Corner or something real broad like that, because what the heck does Mike's Corner do? And if you don't have an audience yet, it's going to be difficult for people to find you. Again, aim it towards keywords. I think that was a great tip, that think about what it's about and use those keywords. So the podcast also has descriptions. It's also known as the show summary, that you can also fill in more information. And it's just as important to get this right to get new listeners intrigued. So make sure that the description is clear to people exactly what you're going to be offering, because a lot of times they're going to read that before they even turn it on at all.
That's so true.
Yeah,
that's true. That's part of your hook. So you've got your podcast name. Now you want to think about, okay, how often do I want to have this podcast out and drop new episodes? And also, what is my podcast style? So believe it or not, there's several formats of how you can set up your podcast. So do you want to have a co-host like we have? Do you want to have an interview style where you bring on a guest every single show? Do you want to have a panel? Do you want to have a solo show? Are you looking to do more of a sort of scripted storytelling podcast that has several storylines within it? So it's very important that you do that so that you know what kind of style, so that you're kind of setting yourself up. And if you're going to have guests, so that you can line them up.
Yes, exactly. There's a lot of planning that goes into place. So it's very important to know, how often are you going to do this, and how long do you want your podcast to be? You have to kind of be careful on that part, because depending on the style, most podcasts really stay within that 15 to 30 minutes in length. So you want to give enough meat, but then you don't want to go overboard. So if you have a podcast that's going to be strictly audio and pre-recorded, then that's the easy part. Then you just have to determine how often you want to drop a new episode.
Yeah, that's true. So, but if you want to be a little different and do both a video and audio format, you're going to have to determine the day and the time and the frequency that you're going to broadcast on air. Because if you think about it, you're going to have one live format, or if you do pre-recorded format, that's going to go on certain platforms, and then you have your audio podcast that's going to go out. So if your podcast is pre-recorded, consider maybe recording maybe 6 to 12 in advance, and then sort of either dropping them. You can either drop them one by one, week by week, or drop it like a series, like how Netflix kind of does it too. And that's becoming a little bit more popular, where it'll be like new season drops, and then you'll have all of them so that users can start just listening right away and get hooked.
I wish all the streaming people would do that. It's driving me nuts on the ones that are just dropping one. I guess I should wait and then watch all of them at once. But anyway, I digress. Yeah. Okay.
Too hard to do.
All right. So preparing, we're going to number 2. You have to prepare a little bit more, regardless of your podcast style or what you choose to do. It's important to have kind of a script, or what we call a run of show. It's especially important if you have guests, because they need to know what's expected and what's going to happen. You don't have to script it word for word, but when you have a script in hand, you'll be able to record it with more ease instead of reaching. We have a hard enough time with words.
Yeah, right, exactly.
If we didn't have some kind of script, we would be rambling, and there'd be a lot of dead air time, which you don't want. And then you get sidetracked, which, again, not saying we don't ever do that, but anyway, you want to stay on those relevant talking points.
Yeah, because we might be having fun, but maybe sometimes the listeners are like, I thought they were going to talk about this.
Yeah, where are we going?
Sidetracked. So the run of show, as you said, it's a general outline of how the broadcast is going to go from beginning to end. And this is kind of also where you want to set up how your show goes and the transitions. And this is really important to just ensure that your show goes smoothly. So here's kind of how we've put together a good format would be an intro hook. So what's an intro hook? This is where you're going to get straight to the point about exactly what you're going to talk about, along with the teaser of something that's listeners are going to gain by the end of the episode. And then you're going to follow that with a very quick 10 to 15 second intro video with music introducing your show. This is good just for branding so that you keep reinforcing your show and its brand.
Yes, exactly. So then it's very nice to introduce yourself
Yes.
and your podcast name, because people may not know who you are. If they're brand new to watching your show, you also want to tell them what your show's about. So give them that little brief summary about what they're going to get out of today's show.
Yes.
So another tip, the first few minutes of the podcast is crucial. So it's important to get straight to that point. It's fun to mess around and all that. I get that. But really, those first few minutes, people are going to decide if they're staying or not.
Yeah, maybe if you have like just tons and tons of followers and you've got, reached that point, you can have that flexibility, but like really, truly, people are there to get something out of it. So following that is going to be your main content. So this is where you go into detail about all the things you said at the top of the show that you're going to cover. So this is where you're going to have your specific talking points. So it's easier for listeners to follow. It's so important to have those talking points so that they're able to digest the information. And then after that, you'll just have your wrap up. And this is important too, so that if you ever decide that you want to do little snippets of your podcast, you have that ability to kind of give them a little preview by doing a wrap up at the end. So this is where you're going to summarize all the key takeaways that you've talked about. And this is a great time to talk about, hey, your upcoming episode of what to tune into next.
Right. And then you want to finish up with giving them a call to action. Mm-hmm. Tell them to go like or share or review or anything, something about your podcast. So tell them to go do something. It's also a good time to tell them where they can find you on all the different platforms. So give them that call to action and then end it with a really cool outro video, because you want to give them that last punch on your brand just one more time.
Yes. And then, of course, you talk about the graphics. If you are doing whether you're doing an audio or video, there are some graphics involved. So you need to create that cover art logo for your podcast. And that's that small little square. Whenever you go on different podcasts, you see that little square image there with your logo. You've seen it, I'm sure, on iTunes, Spotify, and all those others. So the general specifications for that is you can do a JPEG or you can do a PNG, and you need to have it 3,000 by 3,000 pixels. So just remember that.
Yes, and if you're live streaming, especially like we use StreamYard, you're going to need to create a branded thumbnail when you schedule out the broadcast, because you want it to look professional, and you do such a great job on ours. Thank goodness. Every time we have one, they're so pretty and catch people's eye. So you want to catch their eye. You might want to consider a background graphic too if you're going to be having a co-host or ongoing guests on your show.
Yes. And again, this all helps with your branding. So let's move right into, as we're talking about preparing your podcast, you want to think about the podcast streaming platform. So if you plan on doing a podcast streaming, you're going to need a platform that you can record your broadcast, and not only record it, but that you can broadcast it out to multiple social platforms. So there's a ton of choices out there. There's OBS Studio. There's Vimeo, actually, that started doing this. There's Restream. There's Ecamm Live. There's StreamYard, which is what we use and absolutely love, and so on and so forth. So you just kind of have to look at the features of both and see what of all of those and see what fits.
Yeah, it's so funny. Gosh, we've been doing this how long? I don't know, over a year.
Almost 2 years. March will be coming up on 2 years, because we started it in 2020. I know.
Wow. Yeah, I lost a year, almost 2 years. But back when we started, there was Zoom, and then we found StreamYard. There may have been some other random ones out there, but those were the main two. So it's come a long way. We definitely still use StreamYard because it's just incredibly straightforward. It's easy to use and doesn't require any software to download. So those are things that you need to think about. But if you're looking for really more of an advanced high-end platform, you might want to consider Ecamm Live. So those are a couple different platforms that you can look at. All these platforms, though, give you the ability to download both video and audio versions of your podcast, which is very important.
Yeah, which is really nice because if you're planning on doing both, you'll have one platform that will give you both options. So if you're strictly looking to just do audio streaming, and that's just strictly podcast, no video, there's several options as well to choose from. So 2 free options I want to mention that are available on both Mac and Windows are Audacity and GarageBand. If you can, or sorry, GarageBand. Forgive me, GarageBand. Hello. A more high-end option is called Hindenburg, and it offers a lot more built-in podcasting features. So this is, again, if you're looking for more of a high-end professional level, and if you've got the budget that can handle that, then that would be another option to consider.
The Hindenburg. I love that name.
Right.
It talks about that it offers more, and it
Makes me think of Breaking Bad, Eisenberg.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
But again, here we go.
Yeah.
All right. Next thing, number 3, launching. Okay, what are we going to do? You're going to choose your podcasting hosting site. I mean, who knew you needed all this stuff? And you won't need it until you get going. So we're doing all this hard work for you, laying this out. So you may or may not be aware, but podcast directories like Apple and Spotify don't allow you to upload episodes directly to them. So instead, you have to get a hosting site that's going to store all of these and have and be able to broadcast your audio files.
Yeah, this again, like you said, you may not know that this is where we're trying to put it in that nice chronological order for you, because you can't just record it and upload straight to these directories. So these hosting sites, they'll generate an RSS feed. This is what enables you to have your podcast shared on a variety of these directories. So there's several, again, you're going to have a lot of options. So there's several hosting sites out there. Our recommendation is Buzzsprout. We're big fans.
Oh my gosh. When we found Buzzsprout, it definitely made our day, and it definitely made Kelsey's day, because yes. She's the one that has to get all of these out for us. So once you just go to Buzzsprout and create your account. You're going to need to upload your podcast by clicking on the upload podcast episode. Yes. And then you can drag or drop your file in there. So it's really easy. So once it's uploaded, then all you have to do is add the name and description for that certain podcast episode. So it's really easy.
Yeah. So you're also going to need to upload your artwork. This is what we talked about your graphics. So make sure your artwork is really clean and crisp. So you've got to think about this. You're going to have this square that's going to be real tiny or real big if you're watching on a desktop, but it's going to be displayed in different sizes. So it's important that you think about your text size and just your overall look. So our suggestion is to try to maybe make it a little bit more minimal, so that it can be displayed across multiple directories and not get unclear in any ways. And then, okay, this is a big part. You want to write the description of your podcast. We talked about this at the top, but you want to include your show name, your episode number, the release year, etc. So we did this kind of summary of what your podcast is about. This is each episode. These are so important because, again, they're going to read it and make a determination. Do they want to listen?
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of different people. Some are visual, some like to read, some like to listen. So you need to make sure that it's completely filled out. That way you've got everybody covered. And the more visible it will make your show. So a good description definitely tells listeners what's going to be in it for them. I mean, they want to know that. They're not wanting to waste their time. So here's a good tip. Also include timestamps to help listeners follow along with key talking points a little bit easier within each episode.
I personally love this. So when I'm listening to an episode, depending on how long it is, it'll tell me like, oh, this is when they're going to talk, 10 minutes and 12 seconds, they're going to talk about how to do this part. So, as always, encourage listeners to subscribe. So you'll say it verbally in your podcast, but also within the episode when they're reading, you want to encourage them to subscribe and include links of where else they can find you. So that's really important too. So the last thing you can do in Buzzsprout is you pick your podcast category. So this is really important in optimizing your podcast because you want to make sure that you select, whether it's news, politics, entertainment, whatever it is, you want to select the right category. And again, so that increases your visibility.
Exactly. And we talk about Buzzsprout because it's what we use and it is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
And the great part about it is that once you have an account and an active podcast, Buzzsprout's going to do all the work for you. You're not even going to believe this. They go ahead and get you listed in all of the really important directories. There's over 15 podcast apps to get listed, but the main ones include, of course, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcast, and that's about where 95% of the listeners are. But Buzzsprout goes ahead and spreads you across all those other platforms. And they do it all for you.
So great. So to get your podcast listed in these directories, you're actually simply going to go to, there's a tab in Buzzsprout that says directories. So once you're in there, that's when you're going to click submit podcast. So to Spotify, to Apple. So it may take a little bit longer than others to authorize, but just keep checking to make sure it's active. And we kind of went through that when we first started ours. It would sort of come in and say, it's now active on Spotify. It's now active on Apple. So once your directories are listed, the final step, promote. Get the word out about your podcast so people know to tune in and watch it.
That's exactly right. So do we want to share those couple more tips, or you want to include that in our next broadcast?
Well, it's up to you. I don't mind if you want to, we could touch on it real quick.
Yeah, go ahead. We've got time.
Okay. So, there's a lot you could go to about equipment and platforms and all that kind of stuff. But the good news is that you don't need elaborate equipment to get started. Truly, you just need to invest in a good microphone outside of your laptop or desktop. I wouldn't be as reliant on using your desktop or computer's speakers or audio. I would go ahead and get a microphone. So a USB microphone, they're the most versatile and easiest to use. They come in a wide variety of price points, but you can really get a quality microphone for about $100.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't have to be, you can just be simple especially when you're first setting this up and with recording. So with your mic that Sarah's talking about, just make sure that your mic is up over to the side, kind of angled slightly toward your mouth, which will prevent bursts of air from hitting that microphone directly. And it will result in a lot smoother sounding, more natural sounding podcast. Set your microphone also about 4 to 6 inches from your mouth for the cleanest sound. And then last but least, if you want a clearer sound and don't want echoes or sound issues, you might consider using headphones to cut that out. So those are some cool tips just to take along with you. But I think that definitely makes it a wrap.
Yes, absolutely. So as we had talked about, we got to practice what we preach. So just don't forget that you want to subscribe to us for more. We go live on our video podcast on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And we also do a replay on Instagram. And please make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, Fusion One Marketing, because we're always putting out new content for you. So make sure you subscribe. And if you're listening to us, thank you, and leave us a good review.
Thank you much. See you later.
All right. We'll see you all next time.